Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Friday at 4. My name is James Schreiber, and as always, we are visited by Amanda Van Deerheiden. Amanda, why don't you talk to us today about our special guest?
Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. So we have a very exciting guest with us today. He brings over 20 years of experience in large organizations in talent development and leadership initiatives, including marketing and sales. He speaks over 4 languages fluently, and 2 he's currently working on. Giancarlo Donati, thank you so much for being here, and please feel free to add anything I left out.
No, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Jim, for having me today.
Thank you so much for being here. So we're really excited because your forte is development and learning and all things that are corporations around the globe, not just in America. We're really excited to get your take on, where you see the state of learning and development, because it's a huge growing field, and how you think that's impacting in today's market.
Yeah, I think we're actually, I would say, finally at a stage where learning and development is actually getting the recognition it should be getting in terms of its power that it has. For many, many years, learning and development has been, I would say, the ugly stepchild within the HR space. But interestingly, actually, when I started out in my career, I started out on the business side, moved into the learning and development space. At that time, learning development was not even part of HR, was actually part of a marketing organization. So when you think about learning development, how it has developed over the years, it has been looked at differently by different organizations. And there were a few organizations that very early on looked at it as a key driver of employee engagement. And there's example of GE with Croton, that is probably one of the examples, but also particularly in Europe, I would say companies very early on have seen the value. I think in the industry I work in now, the finance industry, I think it's been a bit behind when it comes to adopting development as a key part of the overall HR strategy. And I think we're now at the point where companies are really recognizing the value that the development space brings into an organization, how it actually can really drive the bottom line. And I think that's the new piece. And I think that's really great that we're at this point now.
It's so true. And, employee development is, some people see as an expense, but it's an investment, right? It's an investment in your organization's future, because if your people are not progressing, your organization isn't progressing, right? So where would you recommend organizations start if they maybe have a small budget for learning and development? What do you think is the key absolute essential that companies and organizations should be focusing on in their development strategies?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. What you can do in terms of development will depend also in terms of your size of your company, in terms of the reach you need, as well as what financial capability you have to invest into that space. Now, for small companies, I think there is very good offerings out there in terms of online learning, and we're not, I think about 15 years ago, we all talked about that every training and every learning would be online, and that never came to fruition in a way, because it depends what you train and what the quality and what the impact you want to have. And if you're a small company, you won't be able to invest into big vendors that are out there that can do it. It will be hard to employ people to build everything. So there's really good offerings out there in the marketplace and companies. And I can't possibly mention everyone, but there is Soft Skill, there is LinkedIn Learning, there is Intuition, and the 7 Cities. So there's many different opportunities where you pay a normal licensing fee, and what is interesting is some of those companies, they charge you only by active license, some charge you for you can get the whole company license. So I think these opportunities out there really give a smaller company the chance to start with a curriculum of learning where it's more self-driven. Once the company matures and gets bigger, I think one of the key areas to do an investment first is what I call the leadership development space. Because we all know that about 75% of the people leave a company in connection with their leader. It's not always just the leader's behavior, but it's many things around how the leader drives the vision, the strategy, how they behave, how they treat people, many of those reasons. But those are the key reasons why people leave a company. And therefore, when your company gets to a certain size, I think it's the good space to invest, because what we see is that companies that invest into good leadership development and really teach their leaders how to behave, how to manage, how to engage, how to motivate, what actually comes out of this is lower turnover, higher productivity because higher engagement. So all these buzzwords that we actually hear out there really come to fruition with those kind of companies that invest in that space. So once you hit a certain threshold, I think that is probably the best area to focus on. And once that is settled, you can go to all the employees, use the online opportunities, and maybe now and then, use the people you have in the organization. And that's the other piece you can think about. That's the cheapest option. So use your specialists and make a clear decision that, let's say, 10, 15% of a specialist's time is to train other people proactively, not just, on the fly, but really in organized programs as well as on the job. And if you make that part of their goals, then it will also happen. What is always important is with everything you do in the leadership development space, in the learning space, in technical training space, tie it to the performance review, tie it to how you judge and assess people, because that is really what helps them stick with it. It is very hard to be disciplined when you have, already 10 to 12 hours of work every day.
It's so true. Leaders definitely make or break it. And that's such an amazing content and information you gave us. So thank you so much for that. You talked a little bit about how to leverage your internal staff, but also how to use external vendors that can come in handy. I know I've personally brought LinkedIn Learning into a few of the organizations I've consulted with, and it's so much cheaper than you think it would be. And employees are excited because you're investing in them, and it's a very low cost depending on how many employees you have. So there's a lot of opportunity out there. Jim, I'm going to kick it to you. Any thoughts so far on the leadership space development stuff that we've talked about so far?
Yes, and really interesting answer, Giancarlo. One of the things I want to talk about or get your opinion on is the difference in the workforce today as it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago. I think the workforce in general demands that they are taught in a company. If they're not getting that kind of satisfaction, and they have an understanding that they're going to grow and get better in their career, and their leaders are really looking after their short-term and long-term needs from a career perspective, they're going to start looking elsewhere. Haven't you found that to be the case, especially nowadays?
No, absolutely, Jim. I would fully concur with that. And there is actually a recent study with Gallup that is out there that just basically confirms that actually number one and two reasons for people, apart from the leader itself, is the lack of development and the lack of career opportunity. And when you think about development, doesn't just mean training and learning. Today, development is a broader concept. It goes also into career development. It goes also now, many companies, they also start combining that with the talent management side, where it's actively managing people's performance, their potential, and so on. So I think the professionalization of this space has really grown over the last 15 years. And absolutely, we have a generation of, the millennials are full in the workspace now. I mean, they're going to be the majority of the workspace. Now we have Generation Z, as they call it, coming in. And what is interesting is when we talk about generations, it's always interesting how people use misconceptions to define a generation. And I have had the opportunity to speak to some people that did some research in this space. And what was interesting and when they spoke about it, it kind of clicked and said it makes really sense to me is that generations overall are not that different from each other. What we always have to keep in mind, the moment we look at a generation is a moment in time when they're between 15 and let's say 25. And so when I think back what I did between 15 and 25, I was a lot different than what I do today, when I'm beyond 45. So clearly, out of my perspective now, everyone who is in that age gap will to me seem somehow different and have less, accountability and things like that. We all had less accountability at that age because we didn't have to necessarily. And particularly in Western worlds where, we're all a little coddled potentially. And so the difference now, I think, is very much in terms of connectivity and communication. Where, I can remember when I was picking up the phone in our kitchen, I had that long string so I could go around the corner so my parents wouldn't hear when I talked to my girlfriend. Now our kids don't even have to do that. They can disappear. Everything is Wi-Fi and network. And so that instance that they have this instant gratification, instant access to a world of information. And so what I think is really interesting about that is actually how I believe over the next 10 years, it started already, but I think it's going to really speed up over the next 10 years, is how people learn and how people kind of use knowledge within the workspace. Because when you think about it, if you went to any kind of college, you probably have above average intelligence, whatever you're born with. That average intelligence basically allows you to do probably 90% of the jobs that are out there. Maybe not a rocket science, maybe not a math teacher, but most jobs that you find in the finance industry, that you find in pharmaceuticals, insurance, all those kind of industries, most jobs you can do. And you can learn what you need as you go. And I think the instant learning will become more and more important. And just an example is, did I have a clue how to plumb? No. But when I bought a house and money was tight, I couldn't afford a plumber. So I went on YouTube and I learned how to put in a full new toilet, how to put in a full new sink. Did it perfectly work the first time I did it? Probably not so much, made a bit of a mess. But the second time, actually, it worked perfectly. And, sometimes I think what I did is even better than what someone else did from external. So once you have a capability and a certain level of intelligence and a certain level of what I would say base training, being that, good high school and so on, I think you are ready to do that instant learning and learn many, many things, not everything, absolutely. Some things take longer, but many things that you need in your daily work life, you can learn on the spot by looking at short videos, by reading a short text. And I think that's going to be the power. And what it does also is, I think this will help to the flexibility the workforce will need for the future.
And I would say I'm 100% in agreement with you on that. The instant knowledge that is out there, and for anybody who has young children or children that use the phone or Google, they understand that. If you've ever been in a discussion with your child and you say something was one date and they say, no, it's another, trust me, they're going to Google it and they're going to find the answer immediately. So that instant knowledge it's part of their DNA, what they're growing up with. And I feel that companies that don't bring that into their workplace, don't understand that their workforce are looking for ways to get better, but they're not looking for ways to get better in the next 5 to 10 years. They want to have an understanding of how can I get better? How can I learn my position better now? And where is that going to take me within the organization? And companies that don't understand that are going to lose the top talent and not be able to recruit the kind of talent they're looking for. Your thoughts on that?
No, I would absolutely concur. I think it's definitely at that point where people understand that they have to be in this constant mode of learning. And I would say, the successful people in the past have already always intuitively understood that. When you look at successful people, and by the way, it doesn't matter if they have a high school or a college degree. A successful people, because there's many very successful people out there that, never finished school. It is people that are very flexible, agile. They're open to try new experience, and they have that learning agility, and they want that hunger for learning. And people that have that hunger for learning will always find a space where they will be successful in. And if they're not, guess what? They will move on. They will not stick. And I think that's where I see the difference with some of the people, also that I have worked with throughout my career, is those people that, still in their mid 50s have that hunger, and they still explore new opportunities and learn new things. And then sometimes also people that, at a certain point in life don't have that hunger anymore. And I see it also with young people that don't have hunger and people that have the hunger. So if we can somehow instill in young kids that hunger for learning, that is probably one of the best things you can do. And that's where I think the school system is key. If we can create a school system where we teach the hunger for learning, the excitement for understanding things that are different, then we actually do the society the best service. It's not about learning something by heart. It's not knowing every battle of the Civil War. That is, quite frankly, quite unimportant when we think about the grander scheme of things. And I might have offended now someone who, some people that really love that. But the matter of fact is, if you can instill a hunger for learning, then you really drive society by creating young people that want to go out there and learn. And they might do it in different ways. So we have to learn to be open that everyone learns differently. Why do I know that? I know that myself. I'm highly dyslexic. So I grew up in Switzerland in a German-speaking environment. And when I grew up, dyslexia was not recognized. So when you would look at my school transcripts, I probably wasn't the best, kid. And what was always interesting is, and I never forget, and how these things sometimes stick with you. I once had my, in what you would call English was German for me. My German teacher came to me and said, I always wonder how someone can wrap such a nice piece of chocolate in newspaper. And so basically the feedback he was giving me is my content, my understanding, my comprehension is far beyond the rest of the class. But my expression in terms of using the language was subpar because I had dyslexia. So, I found my way to deal with it over time. And, I never had classes because it didn't exist then. And I found my way and my mechanisms to get around. And there's so many people like this, not just dyslexia. There's autistic kids, there's kids with Down syndrome. There's so many people that can really contribute positively to this society. But as a society, we also have to be open to let those people express and learn the best way they can.
100%. And just, from an educational standpoint and a learning standpoint, we need to get away with teaching to the test and start teaching and learning for a reason. As you said, we don't need to know every single fact. What we need to understand is if you need to find something out, you have the ability and the desire to go figure out how to get there from A to B to C to D. But if you can't get to B and you got to go to F first, have that analytical knowledge in your background on how to do it. Get away from teaching to the test. It doesn't do anything. It actually takes the excitement away from learning.
Absolutely. And the other piece is, learning is a journey, and it's about finding something. And the other thing is, in German, we have a proverb, and I will say it in German, not everyone will understand it. It's called Mut zur Lücke. And when you roughly translate it, it means the courage of the gap. And so basically what it means is sometimes when you don't have all the information, you still have to make a decision. And you can't be paralyzed from decision making because you don't have all the facts on the table. Because guess what? You will never have all the facts. And so a lot of people were taught in the early days and still till today, that you need to know every detail about everything before you make a decision. And in our today's world where information is so fast and information changes, and information is quite inaccurate when we think about it, when you think about all, from Facebook to Twitter to Instagram to all those tools, it's not always that accurate. So we have to learn to pull out the nuggets that are key to make that a decision with the understanding that we don't have all the facts on the table. And now we need that courage to make that leap. And guess what? Sometimes we will fail, and then we should fail fast, learn from it, and try again. And sometimes it's going to work out. And I think that's something we have to instill in the people that are coming now up into organizations, that actually sometimes it's okay to make mistakes. Believe me, my first 10 years of my career, making a mistake was such a big no-no that people were so scared of it that they actually rather did nothing than to make a mistake. And by doing nothing, you actually made a bigger mistake in the end when you think from a profitability perspective.
Let's take the leap. We've talked about education. We've talked about society. Let's bring it back to organizations. What can organizations do right now to support the upcoming generations' grit level? That's what you're talking about, resourcefulness and lifelong learner, learning how to learn, and making sure that we're touching all the different types of learning types and accommodating. What's the biggest advice that you have for organizations to ensure that their developmental programs are aligned with that?
Yeah, I think the first and most important one is probably time. Leave space in someone's workday to learn. And that can be very broad. I mean, the best companies give, 3M, and I think so Google give like 15% of someone's time to innovate. Why do we not give someone 15% of their time to learn? Because by learning, you probably then also will innovate. So I think that's important. And nobody's talking about, the 3-day seminars and some nice fancy castle out in the countryside. That will always exist. And there's some reasons for that. And it's also good that we have that. But we're really looking at giving people time during the workday to learn. Then we should make learning short and sweet. For many pieces. There's some areas of learning where I think more immersive and longer term learning is more effective. But overall, for technical learning, for behavioral learning, for learning around some of the soft skills, not all of them, but some of the soft skills, it's really nuggets. Use technology if you can in terms of short videos. So people, and make it mobile. Make learning mobile. The new generation does everything mobile. And I always say new generation. Guess what? My mother is 75 and she does everything mobile, and so we should not underestimate the agility of our elderly people as well. I think they're pretty good at it if they want to, and if they have an incentive, seeing their grandchildren, that's the best incentive. So I think make it short, make it mobile, give time for it. I think it's not right if the expectation is that all the learning happens outside of the work time. I'm sorry, people have lives as well, and companies have to learn that more and more. I think what will play into it is flexibility in terms of work time overall. I think it all goes hand in hand. If sometimes when I work from home, I'm actually more effective when I work from home than when I am at work, because at work, everyone comes to my desk and asks me questions, and I get pulled every 5 minutes. Someone wants another nugget from me. When I'm at home, the only thing that disrupts me every now and again is my dog barking, and I don't really have to react to that, so I can focus. So, these creative and flexible work arrangements help with the whole piece as well. So I think when we think about these constructs, we should never think about them in unison as one single standalone piece, but always think about it. How does it cut across? If I impact work-life balance, I create easy, accessible learning opportunities. I give people officially time. And guess what? Very important as well is it is clearly endorsed and supported by the senior leaders and demonstrated and lived by example by the senior leaders. Then you get to a point where, you have your secret sauce, basically. And I think that's when companies get successful in that space.
Let's think about wrapping this up. Jim?
Okay. Well, first of all, Giancarlo, this has been a really enlightening conversation. And that's really what this show is about. It's about projecting and giving information and thinking information, back to that theme, to our community. We try to present ideas from professionals like yourself that maybe people agree, maybe they don't agree, but if it gets them to think and it gets them to formulate their next action with their thoughts, then I think we've done our job. And for you out there, we want to thank you for taking the time that you've given us this week. We hope you're really starting to look forward to these videos. I can tell you by the responses that we're getting via comments and via email that we're starting to build a network. And again, this is our neighborhood. It's for all of us. And having experts like Giancarlo on is something that we're trying to provide to all of us. If you like the video, of course, I have to say, please like it, subscribe to the channel, listen to the podcast. They're available on iTunes and iHeartRadio and a couple other places. And tune in next week. But more importantly, send us your comments. Ask us what kind of topics you might be interested in learning about or talking about next week. And without that, it's just going to be Amanda and myself really just talking, and we don't want to do that. We want to be part of the conversation, not just drive the conversation. Amanda, what would you like to say in closing?
So thank you again to Giancarlo for his amazing tips and pointers and sharing his wealth of experience with us. We're really grateful to have him here. I think the question based off of everything we covered that Giancarlo highlighted was, do you have a learning and development strategy? Are you tying it in? Are you thinking through your succession planning? Is your development plan connected with your employees? And is your leaders leading by example? Because all of the parts that we talked about today, you can chalk it up to, do you have a strategy in place? So think through it, think where the gaps are, and figure out a way to invest in your people so that they in return invest in your organization. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.